following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
I am back. Lovin' baseball when we were 12 and innocent. My guest today is Tony D'Angelo, longtime baseball fan who was 12 in 1967. And you're a Met fan, Tony D'Angelo, am I correct?
Well, it was back then, and, good morning, good evening, good afternoon to all those in Radio Land who, whatever time you're listening to this or whatever month or year, I was a Met and Yankee fan. I mean, in the sense that you had so much baseball in those days in the greater New York metropolitan area. I think out of 162 games, each of the Mets and the Yankees broadcast about 150. And it was all free baseball, and it was great camera angles back then. One of the things that I used to like so much on the Met broadcast is you had those really good young pitchers, great young pitchers, Seaver and Ryan and Koosman, Gentry, Jim McAndrew, and the angle that they don't use anymore in baseball, and I don't know why, because the camera work these days, some days ventures on the brain dead. They get all fascinated with the launch angle and all this other stuff, but put the camera behind the plate like we used to see, and we would get really a hint of what it was like right behind the catcher and the umpire to see a Tom Seaver fastball come in, or a Jerry Koosman breaking ball. But I was a Met and Yankee fan. Of course, that was sort of the downslide for the Yankees. Mickey Mantle had moved to first base. I actually became a Yankee fan in, I think it was in 1967. For the heck of it, my family went down to Yankee Stadium, chugging down from Stamford, Connecticut to Yankee Stadium in my father's Volkswagen to watch the Yankees play the Red Sox. And this was Carl Yastrzemski night. And all of Carl's fans from East Hampton, Long Island came, the whole Polish farming community. And they probably, there might have been like 12,000 people in the park, but maybe 4,000 of them were, Carl Yastrzemski's Goombas. And it was, Mickey was playing first base. He was kind of limping around, but Mickey actually was a decent small D first baseman. He wasn't an embarrassment. And if you look at his fielding records back then, they were pretty darn good. And there were days he played really well, and other days he really couldn't limp at all. But what struck me about Yankee Stadium in those days, Zig, is this is 1967, which is right after it was 1966, and there was the great breakdown, and Mel Allen went one way, and Ballantine Beer went another way, and the stadium was old and decrepit looking. So when CBS came in, they had sort of, they weren't baseball people, but they hired a guy by the name of Mike Burke to be the general manager. Now, Mike Burke was not a baseball man, but he knew how to run a performance. So the park was cleaned up. It was, airbrushed white. All the seats were painted blue, so it was this vibrant white and blue. It was gorgeous, and it was clean, and the sound system was really great. I mean, you heard Bob Shepard like he was next to you. Your attention, please, ladies and gentlemen. Batting for the Yankees, number 7, Mickey Mantle, and and it was just like a great environment. And there was a lot of kids my age, 10, 11, 12, 13, started to go to Yankee Stadium or have their parents take them because it was really a fun place to be. You could get tickets for free if you had your mother give you the green stamps from the grocery store. You took them, and 2 filled books would get you 2 grandstand seats. 4 filled books would get you 2 box seats. And it was really kind of a great time to be a baseball fan. Now, you weren't watching the great Yankees, and you weren't watching the '69 Mets, but you were seeing a lot of good baseball. And the '68 Yankee team was really a very, very good team. Nobody was catching Detroit that year. I mean, they were just unbelievable. But the Yankee pitchers, I mean, it was Downing and Stottlemyre and Stan Bonson, who's almost lost to history, who was Rookie of the Year that year, who was really a terrific young pitcher. It was, and they always say, oh, this is the Horace Clarke years. And if you look at, poor Horace was a darn good player. I mean, he wasn't a marquee player, but he was steady, he was consistent, and he could feel very, very well. So that was what was happening when I was, 1967,
well,
68.
Ownership of the Yankees in those days took a big blow when they bought the team. They had assumed they were getting the Yankee farm system before. But Del Webb and Topping really went out of their way to cut back on the system 2 or 3 years before they sold the team. And there were people like Jake Gibbs coming in, and a lot of disappointment. But it was what it was. It gave way to the Fritz. I like to call it the Fritz Peterson years, because of all the folks who ever pitched at Yankee Stadium, the person with the lowest ERA was Fritz Peterson.
He was a darn good pitcher, and because of the whole wife swapping thing, he's identified with that, but he really was a darn good pitcher, and he's lost to history. And he was, I had the pleasure of interviewing him with Bob Lazari, and he was, just a treasure trove of old Yankee stories that would, literally would have you on the ground. They're so funny.
We share that in common. I got to interview Fritz as well, and he was a charming guy. Still is. He's suffering some setbacks in life, going through some memory problems, and I don't know what you call it, Alzheimer's, dementia, but he lived it to the nth. Fritz Peterson,
sure did.
A good man, and good for baseball. If you go to his site on Facebook, under his photos are some remarkable old Yankee, old-timers day pictures of when he played, and his rotation with Al Downing and Mel Stottlemyre was absolutely superb. So, yes, they went downhill a bit, but they were soon to be coming back under George.
Yeah, one of the things, and few people know this, but I was a great fan and had attended several Mayor's Trophy games. And, of course, none of the kids know what a Mayor's Trophy game is. But a Mayor's Trophy game is where, at least in my era, the Mets played the Yankees, and the proceeds of the gate, went to buy bats and balls and equipment for sandlot teams in the greater New York area. And these were charity games, and they were like, we didn't have interleague play and all this other stuff, but to see the Yankees play the Mets was a really a big thing. Now, more often than not, the star players wouldn't play, or they'd play a little bit or something like that. But it was a way of like bringing up people with, maybe AAA for a night or something, and seeing how they do under major league conditions. But I attended a few Mayor's Trophy games, and I actually was the beneficiary, playing sandlot ball, of some of the bats and balls that the Yankee and Met foundations would give to the kids. And if you showed up in the team office with a letter, you would write in and say, "Please give me bats and balls." And they send you a letter saying, "Bring this in during normal business hours," and you walked in. And they handed you 2 boxes of sort of grade B Louisville Slugger bats. They were the rejects. The grain didn't exactly line up, so if you hit it like on the handle once, the bat would crack. And 24 grade B balls. I mean, you could play with them. And it was it was a whole lot of fun. I mean, it was, they were called foundation baseballs. But one time, I had ended up in Shea Stadium in November to pick up my bat and ball allotment. Now, Shea Stadium in November, you're at Willets Point in Queens. And the wind is like 60 miles an hour, and it's cold, and it's drafty, and it's terrible. So I parked the car, and I had a big red Oldsmobile Delta 88 back then. Even that was getting blown around. And I shivered to the door. And the first thing I thought as I was shivering to the door was, Joe Namath, absolutely, positively, I don't care what anybody says, belongs in the Hall of Fame, because anybody that could throw a football straight under those conditions deserves to be. So I handed my letter. The very nice guard pointed me to the elevator. I went in the elevator, and I went up to the Mets offices, and I'm holding the letter, and I'm waiting there for about 5 minutes. But while I'm waiting there, right in the receptionist's cage no closer from like where I'm sitting to my fireplace on this very cold day, the 1969 New York Met championship trophy. It's like right there, staring me right in the face. Nobody's watching it. Nobody's guarding. Nobody cares. And I'm thinking to myself, now, if I took this and I hid it under my coat and I went into the and I drove away, would anybody know it's missing?
It could stay in your garage for the rest of your life, and no one would know it until after you were gone.
I have it out in the barn, like, shh, come here. So I show it to you. That and Jacques Plante's mask, but thank God I didn't do it, and I got my bats and balls, and but anyway, so I'll have to say this. Evil George Steinbrenner, if you want to call him Evil George, George killed the Mayor's Trophy game because he was studying the schedule one day, and he saw on the schedule Mets. And he said, well, what's the Mets? What's Mets doing on the schedule? And somebody explained to him, Mr. Steinbrenner, that's our yearly charity game. He says, well, the heck with that. If I'm going to play the Mets, I'm going to play them for money. And that was really the seeds of interleague play.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Whoa. That's very interesting. I want to clarify something with you. I don't know if you have a memory when Mickey Mantle came in to play first base. Who played center field? I know, and I want to tell you, if you don't know, it was a fellow Italian of yours.
Probably the finest center fielder I've ever seen play. Really, I mean, he was. You're speaking of Joe Pepitone, who was a magnificent outfielder. He was, and people would look at me and say, "You can't. What are you talking about?" I said, "Well, Phil Pepe, the late great Phil Pepe, agreed with me. He said he was the best center fielder we ever saw in New York." Nobody stopped Pepe when Pepe felt like playing. Problem is, Pepe didn't feel like playing all the time.
Right.
But amazing. I watched the game. You talk about being 12 years old. I was sitting in the upper right field bleachers with my father and my brother, and it was a game against Cleveland, and I think it was Leon Wagner had hit a ball back to the monuments. Pepitone just glided back there, caught the ball, turned and threw And Tom Tresh was playing shortstop in those days. I mean, he was really kind of trying to do the best he could. His knees bothered him. He kind of lost his stick by that point. And threw a line drive to Tom Tresh to hold a runner at second base. I had never seen a play like that in my life, and I thought to myself, if this guy felt like playing, I mean, he would be MVP every year. Just amazing, amazing, yeah.
Great story.
Amazing.
I'm going to tell you my Joe Pepitone story. I was, I guess it was 73 when I was in California, and I knew, and my grandfather knew, I wouldn't be coming back to live in New York. So he became a Yankee fan. Never thought I'd see the day. But one time I called him, and he said, Joe Pepitone hit a home run in both ends of a doubleheader, and he was so excited. He was just like a couple of weeks before he passed away, and baseball was all he had. To be thrilled by Pepitone like that is a good memory of the man for me. So interesting.
Well,
that
the amazing
were him being that great in the outfield. That's nice.
Yeah, the amazing thing about Pepitone is I watched a lot of baseball in those days. I never, ever saw a game where if a pitcher brushed him back, the very next pitch was a home run. I mean, it was when he felt like concentrating. There was nothing would stop this man, really. You know, it's interesting. You mentioned Pepitone. Now, in those days in Brooklyn, there was a lot of great scholastic ball players. There was Pepitone, Rico Petrocelli, there was Joe Torre, there was Tommy Davis, but more than one person. There's Phil Pepe and another person who was a youngster back then. They said they would tell me, or they did tell me, you know who the best player out of all of them was? And I'd say, no. Who was it? Was it Tommy Davis? No. Kurt Blefary. Kurt Blefary was supposed to be original. And he just, he had that one good year with Baltimore, and then the injuries, and then the illnesses, and he really was. He was really the cat's pajamas in baseball. And
cold weather. We talked about the weather where you are a little bit off the air. It's freezing this time of year. Baseball players are rarely developed in that type of climate. And for guys that you mentioned, they were Sandlot players when I was a kid. And to see them develop, to see Joe Torre come up and take over for Dale Crandall with the Braves in 61 or 62, and step right in on a tremendous Brave team. A Brooklyn kid, Frank Torre's little brother, little fat brother, who would be a bat boy for them in their heyday, for the Braves in their heyday, develops into this baseball icon.
Well, I had a conversation. This is going back over 30 years ago, for like 20 minutes with Frank Torre at a baseball. This was the New York Hot Stove League dinner that used to go on every year in Leonard's of Great Neck in Long Island. People who watch The Sopranos know of Leonard's of Great Neck, maybe not knowing exactly what it is, but that was the wedding venue where Johnny Sack attended the wedding coming out of prison. This huge, Italian banquet hall with the ice sculptures and that sort of thing. But Mr. Torre is a lovely man, and we talked, and I told him at that time, I said, I think your brother belongs in the Hall of Fame as a player. And he politely disagreed with me. He said he's not a great player, he's a fine player, but thank you very much for saying that. And we talked about baseball. And he said, you won't realize this. He says, because you're young. At that point, I was young. But in 1963, I was playing for the Braves. I was playing decently. And I retired from baseball. Do you know why I retired? I said, no, Mr. Torrey, why did you retire? He said, because the McGregor Sporting Goods Company gave me $5,000 a year more to sell sporting goods, so that's what I did. You know,
that shows you what the pay scale was back in those days. And he sounds like he was a very unassuming man.
Oh, very much so. He was
nice.
Almost reminded you of Horace McMahon, the actor. Very tall, very, very low key, huge hands, and you could see why he was really a great first baseman. But, it was a nice conversation. And as we were leaving, I said, your brother belongs in the Hall of Fame. He waved his hand and he says, no, that's okay. Thanks for saying it, kid.
Well, what's interesting? I'm gearing these podcasts to memories when you were 12. And when I was 12, the Mets hadn't been born yet, and the Giants just moved to San Francisco, and I started following the Braves intensely. I rooted for them in the '57 World Series because I was a National League guy. I loved the National League. And I ended up loving the 58 Braves and rooting for them really hard. And Frank Torrey platooned, if you can call it that, with Joe Adcock. Frank Torrey was an excellent defensive first baseman.
Sure was. He sure was.
He came in for Adcock. They were a good lefty-righty platoon system in a lineup that included people like Wes Covington and Aaron and Matthews and Johnny Logan, Del Crandall. They were a tremendously deep team and with a great pitching staff, anchored in the bullpen by another New Yorker, McMahon. Don McMahon grew up in Brooklyn, if I'm not mistaken. So, go ahead.
No, one of the things I did want to mention before I forget is that if you are a great Giant fan, and I recommend to you and to all baseball fans of the early 60s era. I was watching this movie last night, and this caught me quite by surprise. The name of the movie is Experiment in Terror. Was made in 1962. It has Glenn Ford, Stephanie Powers, and Lee Remick. So it's not at all hard to look at, either one of them. But the last 15, it settles. Actually, it settles on a number of things, but it's about a murderer in San Francisco City, and a lot of good old San Francisco shots in the early 60s. But the last 15 minutes of the film is a treasure for any San Francisco Giant fan. That's all I'm going to say. You need to go and watch it.
I will indeed. I'm sure it's on YouTube. Am I correct?
I actually have it on something called Classic Reel on Roku, and I just stumbled into it last night because I was watching another movie from the 60s with Stephanie Powers, and it just looped into this other one. And I was like, I was amazed. I just couldn't get away from it. And there's so many little, how could I put it? So many vintage shots and sounds, and I will not spoil it. You need to see it. You need to see it.
I will indeed, and that's a good recommendation from Tony D'Angelo. I hope I made you feel like a 12-year-old today.
You know, you've lifted my spirits on this cold day, Zig, and I really do appreciate it. I still have Rheingold beer jingles in my head, if that helps.
I have a long time memory of Ballantine beer with Mel Allen. I still picture him actually drinking the beer on the air, as a matter of fact.
The rain delays were terrific because he'd down a couple of triangular glasses and just go off, and nobody could do a rain delay like Mel Allen.
Good days to remember.
Yes, for sure.
All right. Tony, thank you for joining the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. And I'm glad I made you smile, and I'm glad you had a good time.
I sure did, and best to everybody out there in Radio Land. And remember that I don't drink beer, but if I did drink beer, my beer is Rheingold, the dry beer.
the dry beer. Be well. Stay out of trouble, Tony. We'll talk to you soon. Thank you, everybody, for listening. I hope you laughed. I hope you smiled. I hope you remember the good times. Happy trails.
Take care.
The proceeding has been a Comfortably Zoned network production. You are advised to keep your dreams wet, your humor dry, your children and grandchildren out of military recruiting offices and off the laps of clerics who wear dresses. Thank you for listening, everyone. Happy trails.